the tender whispers of love in the dead of night, and you tell me that you're pleased and that I'm never alone. You're a good, good God. It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. You're a good, good Father. It's who you are. Who you are. Who you are. It's who you are. Who you are. And I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. I see many searching for answers far and wide, but I know there are answers that only He provided. We know just what we need before we say a word. You're a good God. Who you are, who you are, who you are, it's who you are, who you are, and I'm loved by you. Who I am, who I am, who I am, who I am. You're a good, good Father. Who you are, who you are, who you are, it's who you are, who you are, and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. Say you're perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You're perfect, perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. Say you're perfect, perfect in all of your ways. Oh, you're perfect, perfect in all of your ways. Oh, you're perfect in all of your ways. No matter what it looks like, you're perfect. Perfect in all of your ways. You are perfect in all of your ways. You are. You're perfect in all of your ways. Oh, you're perfect. Perfect in all of your ways. You're perfect in all of your ways. Everybody say, you're a good, good Father. Who you are, who you are, who you are, who you are, who you are. Loved by you. It's who I am, who I am, who I am, who I am, who I am. You're a good, good Father. Who you are, 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 and I'm loved by you. It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am. Hallelujah.
But Thomas, sometimes called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. The other disciples told him, "We saw the Master." But he said, unless I see the nail holes in his hands, put my finger in the nail holes, and stick my hand in his side, I won't believe. So Thomas says in verse 25, unless I see the nail holes in his hands. I want to talk about just that one word, unless. You may be seated in the Lord's presence. For 3.5 years, Jesus walked with his disciples. It was 12 of them initially. There was Peter, there was Andrew, there was James, there was John, there was Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, James the son of Alphaeus, Simon the Zealot. There was a disciple named Judas who was the son of James. Then there was Judas Iscariot, which means from the south or south side Judas. Some of y'all are referred to by the neighborhood you grew up in. And then that last disciple was Thomas. Jesus walked with these men for 3.5 years, and he trained them in the area of ministry. So when Thomas says after Jesus' resurrection that unless I see the nail prints, unless I see his spear lacerated side, and unless I put my hands into the nail prints or put my hand into his spear lacerated side, Thomas says, I will not believe. Now, what's really interesting about that, the 10 other remaining disciples had already seen Jesus and heard from Jesus. Thomas was just out of church that Sunday. And Jesus showed up, and without Thomas being present, the remaining disciples told Thomas what they had seen and what they had heard. And Thomas said, unless I see it for myself, I will not believe. The same Thomas who had walked with Jesus for 3.5 years, he said, unless I see him for myself, I will not believe. How did Jesus train these disciples? I'm so glad you asked. I believe the Bible gives us 3 responses as to how Jesus trained these disciples. First of all, he lived his life before them. That literally means that Jesus lived his life in front of him. That is, day in and day out, for 3.5 years, they observed the way that Jesus lived. He lived life before them or in front of them. The second way that we learn that Jesus trained his disciples, not only did he live his life before them, but he preached his future to them. Which means the idea that he was going to die, be buried, and then rise from the grave should not have come as news to the disciples, because Jesus had already preached it to them. He preached it to them in John chapter 13, John chapter 14. He talks about it in Mark 8, Mark 12, and Matthew 16 and verse 21. Jesus told his disciples, I'm going to die, I'm going to be buried, and I'm going to rise again. He lived his life before them, but then he preached his future to them. There's a third way that Jesus trained his disciples, and it is this: he performed his miracles around them. So let all of that sink in. The point that I'm trying to make is why all of these disciples should have been convinced of who Jesus was, because they watched the way he lived, they heard everything that he taught, and they witnessed the miracles that he performed. Parents, I want to recommend to you that if you want to make a lifelong impression on your children for the good, let them watch the way you live. Let them hear the things that you teach, and let them see the works that you perform. Because one thing about life, the only thing you get to take with you is the knowledge that you made someone else's life better. This past week, two of the heroes, not only of the Christian faith, but of the long civil rights struggle, went home to be with the Lord. Mr. C.T. Vivian, and then this past weekend, Congressman John Lewis. One of the things that I admire so much about these generals of the faith, one who passed at 95, the other who passed at the age of 80, is that neither of them was concerned about plaques and awards. They were only concerned about making a difference in the lives of the people that they came in contact with. And it doesn't matter what kind of certificate you may have hanging on the wall, you won't take that with you. Hey, but Jeff, I can guarantee that you don't take anything with you. You know how many funerals I've done? You know how many times I've stood up here where bodies or earthly houses were laid out in front of me, and something I can guarantee you, you don't take nothing with you. A man one day was preparing in advance for his homegoing experience, and he decided that one of the things he wanted to do, Brother Knox, he wanted to take all of his money with him. So he started searching throughout the community for an honest funeral director. And he said to the funeral director, I want to take all of my money with me. He said, what do you mean? He said, when you put me in the casket, put all my money in there with me. Funeral director said, how much are we talking about? He said, $1 million. So you mean to tell me you want $1 million? He said, I want $1 million in the casket with me. He said, sir, I make you this promise. You will take every dime of it with you. The man passed away. Came time to have the homegoing celebration. After the casket was closed, after the preacher pronounced earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, the man's body was lowered into the grave. The assistants of the funeral director said to him, sir, we done buried a whole lot of bodies, and this body didn't feel any heavier than the other bodies we have buried. Did you put the man's money in there as you promised? He said, I sure did. I put every dime of his $1 million in the casket with him. The funeral assistant said, well, where did you put it? He said, I wrote him a check. Stuck it right there in his. What are you getting that thought? You don't take any of it with you. But what you can take with you is the confidence that the differences that you've made will be left behind long after you are gone. Why is it that Thomas said, I will not believe unless I can put my finger in the wounds in his hand and put my hand in the wound in his side? That leads me to say one major thing about the subject of unbelief. And it is this: unbelief is not the absence of evidence. Unbelief is the desire to remain in darkness. Let me give it to you again. Unbelief is not the absence of evidence. It is the desire to remain in darkness. Have you ever met people that you were trying to explain something to, and it didn't matter how many different ways you said it, they just couldn't get it? Now, I've lived long enough, Sister Terry, that I'm at the age and the stage that after I told you about twice, I can determine whether or not you are trying to get it or if you're not getting it because you don't want to get it. And some people, their unbelief is not because you are not presenting them with sound evidence. It is because they have a desire to remain in darkness. And some people, it doesn't matter how good you tell them something is, if they don't want to receive it, they are simply not going to receive it. You can hand some people a Krispy Kreme chocolate iced donut. Have mercy, Jesus. And you know what they'll say? It's sweet, but it's got a hole in it. Which means it doesn't matter how much you try to do for some people. It doesn't matter how you try and explain something to them, they are not going to get it because they don't want to get it. Let's take then this subject of unbelief, and I want to share with you on my way to my seat 4 reasons why I'm rolling with God all the way to the end. The old saints would say, you can't make me doubt him because I know too much about it. And I'm rolling with God all the way to the end. And here's why. Let me break it into 4 pieces. Here's the first piece. The natural universe screams of his existence. In Romans chapter 1, verse 18 through verse 20, Paul wrote to the believers at Rome. And Paul says, in essence, even if you didn't have a Bible, you still ought to be able to conclude that God is real. The point that Paul makes is you cannot have a building without a builder. You cannot have a creation without a creator. You cannot have a watch without a watchmaker. Even though I was not present when this watch was made in 1979, because I've had it repaired, and that's the date stamp on the inside. 1979 is almost as old as I am. I was not there when the watch was made, but I got sense enough to know that because the watch exists, somebody had to make it. Paul drives that theme home in Romans chapter 8, or Romans chapter 1, verse 18 down through verse 20. Watch what he says beginning in verse 18. He says, but God's angry displeasure erupts as acts of human mistrust and wrongdoing and lying accumulate. As people try to put a shroud over the truth, but the basic reality of God is plain enough. Open your eyes, and there it is, by taking a long and thoughtful look at what God has created. People have always been able to see what their eyes as such can't see. Eternal power, for instance, and the mystery of his divine being. Watch this. So nobody has a good excuse. My mama used to tell me specifically, my daddy told me too, he just didn't say it in words. My mama used to say, if I got in trouble in school and came home to explain my trouble, I know it's hard for y'all to believe the pastor ever got in trouble in school. I know. I know it's hard. It's hard to believe. It's hard to believe. It's terrible. You're struggling with it today. But I did on occasion. I got in trouble in school. And my mom would ask me when I got home, what happened? And because the teacher said, you were talking in class. I said, well, Mama, what had happened was this boy asked me a question. I was responding to his question. The teacher didn't see him ask the question, but the teacher saw me responding. And that's how I got in trouble for talking in class. And my mama would say, did the teacher tell you not to talk in class? I said, yes, ma'am. She told me not to talk in class. Well, why did you talk in class? I said, because the fellow who asked me the question was my friend. Here's what my mama would say verbally. I didn't send you to school to make friends. I sent you to school to learn. My daddy said the same thing. He just didn't say it verbally. My daddy would introduce my seat of learning to the Board of Education. What am I getting at? There should have been enough that my parents instilled in me at home until it fixed me even when I got to school. And what Paul is saying is, by virtue of observation, if you pay attention to what you see around you, your only conclusion can be, there must be a God somewhere. The idea that the sun can be suspended 93 million miles above the surface of the earth, it is close enough to us to keep us from freezing, yet far enough away to keep us from being incinerated. There must be a God somewhere. The natural universe screams of his existence. That's not the only reason I'm rolling with God all the way to the end. Not only because the natural universe screams of his existence, but secondly because the silence of the skeptics speaks of his existence. The universe screams it. The silence of the skeptics speaks of it. There are two primary explanations that people from scientific perspectives have given to explain the origin of the universe. The first is what we would call the Big Bang Theory. And some of you thought that was just a television show, but it is actually a theoretical view of how the universe was created. And that theory postulates this notion that two massive objects collided in outer space. And from that collision, billions of years ago, particles of matter shattered throughout the expanse, and those particles and gases form planets, and those planets form galaxies, and here we are millions of years later. That's huge. A second expostulation concerning the existence or creation of the universe is that humanity or life began in the sea, and that a slug crawled from the sea onto dry land, crawled back into the sea, back onto dry land, back into the sea, back on dry land, crawled up a tree, hung from its tail, and that's your great, 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 great granddad. And whether you choose to believe the blob or the bang, I contend that it takes more faith to believe either one of those than it would take to believe the truth. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1 says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Pastor, what are you getting at? All skeptics become silent when explaining the Big Bang Theory, because my follow-up question is, if two objects collided in outer space, where did the objects come from? And if they collided in outer space, where did outer space come from? If you're a big banger, life began in the sea, where did the sea come from? You say a slug crawled from the sea to the land, where did the land come from? You say a slug climbed up a tree, hold on now, where did the tree come from? The silence of the skeptics speak of his existence. Well, the natural universe screams of his existence. The silence of the skeptics speak of his existence. Let me give you a third one, and this applies directly to Thomas. This applies to why Thomas should have known that Jesus was who he said he was. The personal revelations testify of his existence. Which means if Jesus wasn't real to anybody, he ought to have been real to Thomas. Why? Jesus had lived before them, Jesus had preached his future to them, and Jesus had performed his miracles around them. Thomas was present in John chapter 1 when Jesus was baptized. And John the Baptist said, "Behold the Lamb of God that takes away the sins of the world." John was present when the Spirit of God came down in the form of a dove and landed on Jesus. John was present when God the Father spoke from heaven and said, "This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased." That's all in John chapter 1. John was present in Thomas was present in John chapter 2 when Jesus turned water into wine. You know he had to remember the whole wine part. Thomas was present in John chapter 11 when Jesus called Lazarus from the grave. He was present in John chapter 6 when God took 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread and fed 5,000 men. Thomas should have known better. Hey, Sister Erica, can I prove to you the extent to which Thomas should have known better? Now this for Bible readers. Everybody ain't gonna catch this, but this for Bible readers. Now, remember, Jesus showed up the day of his resurrection, met with 10 of the disciples, but Thomas was not present. Watch Thomas's response in verse 25. But he said, "Unless I see the nail holes in his hands, put my finger in the nail holes, and stick my hand in his side, I won't believe it." Let me tell you how ironic that is. Not only was Thomas absent after Jesus rose from the dead, Thomas was absent from the crucifixion. The only disciple who was present while Jesus was being crucified was John. So Thomas, my question to you is, what nail holes? What spear-lacerated side? Why do you believe he was nailed to the cross and you didn't see that? Why do you believe he was speared in the side and you didn't see that? But all of a sudden you don't believe he got up because you say you weren't there when he showed up to discuss it. And how can you claim to believe one thing while you deny or doubt something else? I'll tell you why. It is because unbelief is not the absence of evidence. It is the desire to remain in darkness. Some of you as parents, you've been trying to tell your kids some stuff and you're wondering when they're going to get it. Give it a minute. They're going to come to you for long and say, "Mom, you were right." You keep telling them that money talks, but all it says is goodbye. They don't believe it while you're writing the checks. Give that thing a minute. I had a cousin who got mad at the cable company because they cut her cable off. She said, "You never guess what explanation they gave." They said they cut the cable off because I didn't pay the bill every month. She said, "Well, I paid them when they hooked it up." In her mind, as long as the line was still there, the movie should have kept on flowing. Some things you just give it some time, you put it in them, and God will bring it out of them. this level of unbelief that existed in Thomas was willful blindness. How can you believe he got crucified and you didn't see that? Yet you demand to put your finger into the nail holes and thrust your hand into his spear lacerated side. That forces me not to ask Thomas a question, but to ask you a question. What miracle in your life are you explaining away? You had the nerve to see the truck coming and ask God to keep it from hitting you, and then when it didn't hit you, you took credit for your driving and your maneuvering skills. You don't need a new miracle to know how good God has been to you. You just need to start acknowledging some of the things he's already done. I got word this past week that one of my relatives that I love as dearly as I love any other human being on the planet has been diagnosed with an infirmity. Here's what I know. The same God who brought my brother out can bring her out. Same God that brought my mama out can bring her out. Same God who brought me out can bring them out. And when we get to the place where we take so much credit for our good days until we don't acknowledge God during our bad days, we miss the opportunity to brag on God about how good he has really been. Well, I told you there are 4 reasons that I'm rolling with God all the way to the end. I've given you 3. First reason I'm rolling with God is because the natural universe screams of his existence. Because the silence of the skeptics speak of his existence. Because the personal revelations testify of his existence. But here's the 4th reason that I'm rolling with God all the way to the end. And it doesn't sound like any of the first 3. I'm rolling with God all the way to the end because God gives second chances. And I don't know how deep you came in here to be today, but I need chances. Oh, Pastor, I've been saved since 1945. You might have been, but you ain't been right since then. Because you might be holy at 71, but the Lord remembers when you were 17. Some of us are so funny. We look at other people and talk about a whole list of things that they do that we don't do, as if we don't have our own list. Self-righteousness is a sin. Pride is a sin. Gossip is a sin. Lying is a sin. Stealing is a sin. Pastor, I don't steal. Do you go on Facebook while you're on your job, clocked in? Do you tweet, check Instagram, post, keep up with your favorite television show while you're on people's job? Do you take personal phone calls during company time? You know what that's called? Stealing. That's how you spell stealing. The good news about God, he gives second chances. Thank God that this text doesn't end in verse 25. Verse 25, Thomas said, unless I see the nail holes in his hands, put my finger in the nail holes, stick my hand in his side, I won't believe it. Here's a second chance beginning in verse 26. 8 days later, his disciples were again in the room. This time, Thomas was with them. Now, I don't know where he was the first time. I don't know why all 10 of them showed up. Thomas wasn't there. It wasn't that the time changed and he forgot to set his clock an hour forward or an hour behind. I don't know if he was at the Jerusalem Walmart because they announced that they were rolling back prices. I don't know if he was in line the day before Thanksgiving and was trying to get a $200 TV for $39.95. I don't know if he got word The snow crab legs were on sale for $4.90 pounds. Some of us would miss seeing Jesus for crab legs at $4.99 a pound. I know I would ask him to hold on a few minutes till I got out the line. Thomas was not with them. Here's the rest of verse 26. Jesus came through the locked doors, stood among them and said, "Peace to you." Then he focused his attention on Thomas. Nobody had to tell him that Thomas was tripping the week before. Jesus knows all things. He focused his attention on Thomas. Here's what he said to him: "Take your finger and examine my hands. Take your hand and stick it in my side. Don't be unbelieving, believe." Here's Thomas. Thomas said, "My master, my God." Jesus said, "So you believe because you've seen with your own eyes. Even better blessings are in store for those who believe without seeing." Jesus provided far more God-revealing signs that are written down in this book. These are written down so you will believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and in the act of believing have real and eternal life in the way he personally revealed it. Romans chapter 10 and verse 17 says that faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. Hebrews 11 and verse 1 says that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Hebrews 11 and verse 6 says that without faith it is impossible to please him. For he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. I'm rolling with God all the way to the end because I've got evidence that the universe provides. The skeptics are silent when they try to explain things without including God in the equation. Because of the personal things he has done in my life, and then because he's a God of second chances. And somebody said, "Pastor, I blew my second chance. I'm on about chance 1,777,000,000,000. All the Pastor, I've had a whole lot of chances. And I'm thankful that he's the God not only of a second chance, but the God of another chance. But one day, all chances will run out. Question is, will you be in disbelief when the chances